The Need for Consistency, Unit 3, Lesson 2. Welcome to Conflict Resolution and Peacemaking, the class that teaches you how to manage interpersonal conflict and drama for yourself and others. I'm your instructor, David Lowry. Before we begin today's lesson, here's another thought that could be helpful to you as a peacemaker. Like Russian dolls, we have nested personalities. In conflict, it's a good idea to pay attention to which self we are presenting. Is it our emotional, intellectual, cultural, or religious self? It may well be that the other person does not understand the self we choose to represent us. For instance, if one person is speaking religiously while another is listening intellectually or in some other way, it is possible that the mismatching of interacting selves is the source of the conflict. In our last session, we examined the role of perceptions as it relates to conflict. We noticed our perceptions are based and organized by a principle known as selective perception. We said that an organizing principle of the mind causes us to expose, manage, and remember information and stimuli in a way that's consistent with our personal preferences. Today, we will build upon those concepts by introducing attribution theory, cognitive dissonance, and cognitive consistency. Attribution theory studies how individuals form preliminary opinions about others based on cursory characteristics and impressions gathered upon first meetings. The attributional approach is at work daily as people judge others by their age, looks, race, religion, political affiliations, and hundreds of other variables. Most attributional judgments are surface level things we can see very quickly, such as physical height, skin color, hair coloring, and other physical features such as jewelry, skin blemishes, and the like. As we've stated earlier, many unknowns exist when we first meet someone. To compensate for these unknowns, the attributional theory says we quickly form opinions about others based on information we gather from our perceptions of physical attractiveness, social desirability, and potential competence in the workplace. The mind notes these prominent characteristics, draws on its memories of others we have known who had these characteristics, then extrapolates what a person will be like. In the early stages of a relationship, physical appearance is one of the most important predictors of one's willingness to visit and get to know another person. We usually attribute good characteristics to those whose appearances pleases us. When we first meet people in the work environment, we make attributions about their competence and task effectiveness. An internal sizing up occurs as we meet people in the workplace and determine whether they are desirable or not. When we meet people, and even more so after we get to know them, we make attributions about the degree of similarity between ourselves and the other. The congruity between people is known as homophily. We often base our perceptions of homophily on perceived similarities of task, social, and economic conditions. When we perceive differences between ourselves and another, we are more comfortable with complementary differences than competitive or outright differences. For instance, a shy person might enjoy being with a person who has the complementary ability to make them feel comfortable and bring them out. Part of the attribution process is determining whether the person likes and approves of us. We tend to like all people who like us. We attribute good things to those whom we believe are trustworthy enough for us to self disclose our private information. Our information and impression can be wrong. Attributions play an essential role in our estimation of others, yet, if we're honest, we must acknowledge that attributional judgments are only sometimes the best guide for making solid decisions. Our first impressions can be mistaken. Peacemakers need to realize the human tendency to form attributional biases lest we find ourselves in conflict based on little more than our prejudices. The answer lies in our willingness to accept that we all make unfounded attributions and give them a healthy benefit of the doubt. Almost everyone has heard the saying that every story has two sides. Yet, As most peacemakers will attest, most people have thoroughly convinced themselves that their interpretation of events is correct. It's more likely that our attributions and selective perceptions are at work. Yet, there are other reasons as well, and these include cognitive dissonance and cognitive consistency. First conceived by Leon Festinger in 1957, cognitive dissonance is the tendency of people to seek harmony between the things they think and do. It is the notion that people strive to maintain an internal balance that reduces stress between their thoughts and actions. Greatly simplified, when there is a mismatch between one's beliefs, attitudes, and activities, an inner state of dissonance occurs which must be addressed if one is to feel at peace once again. Cooper, in 2007, notes that the need to resolve dissonance is not a preference one may ignore. It's like a relentless drive. It's not that we prefer consistent states, we are driven to create consistent conditions. Cooper further points out that dissonance has a magnitude. The greater the distance between the behavior and internal states, the greater the dissonance. For instance, if you believe that vaping is harmful and you do it anyway, you will begin to feel a dis-ease or dissonance between your actions and thinking. Even though you allow your actions to override your thinking, the dissonance remains. To ease the cognitive dissonance, one must either convince their thinking about the harm of the behavior or stop the vaping. Not only can conflicts arise because of dissonances within people, but they can also result because of cognitive dissonances between individuals. Behaviors that produce little to no dissonance in one person may have the potential to create severe dissonance in another. When this occurs, it may appear to one party or the other that one is being unreasonable. For instance, a student I knew took a job with a large company that paid very well upon graduation. The only catch was, among his duties, he had to call people who were delinquent in their payments and exert whatever leverage he could find to get them to pay their accounts in full. One of his clients was a small, financially struggling religious order known for its charitable acts. In the end, the young man left his well-paying job. He could not stand the dissonance between the expectations of his employers to pressure the religious order versus his internal states as he tried collecting these bills. Similar to the concept of cognitive dissonance is the notion of cognitive consistency. This theory focuses less on the relationship between thinking and actions than the desire to create a balanced internal well-being state by living in consistent patterns. According to the theory, inconsistencies create tensions within individuals. For instance, if one's company requires financial reports be posted by the first of every month, employees will expect the company to furnish the appropriate tools so they can do so. If an organization penalizes one person who arrives at work late, cognitive consistency will cause most to expect this penalty should be equally applied to all who arrive late. If it is not, the theory of cognitive consistency states that tensions will rise because there's a need for consistency. Even though there's a mental need for consistency, it's observable that people are anything but consistent. Thus, conflicts often arise as consistency expectations are violated. In this podcast, we have discussed the roles of interpersonal perceptions as it relates to our tendencies to judge others based on attributions of attraction, social desirability, and other variables. We also noted that the need for consistency impacts our perceptions. We remind peacemakers that looking for critical differences in perceptions between participants is vital to creating peaceful solutions. At the same time, we must offer this caution. Peacemakers are just as much a slave to their interpersonal perceptions as those engaged in conflict. We must be careful that our predilections and interpersonal perceptions aren't inadvertently introduced into our work of settling conflicts. In our next podcast, we will offer peacemaking principles based on what we've discussed thus far about the role of perceptions. We encourage you to download a copy of the script for this podcast so you may answer a short quiz.